The best DJI FPV controller to alternative is not what you expect, and let me reiterate, this controller does great with these long sticks I recommend in the previous video. If you want a full review on this controller, check that out. But there are a few reasons why you might want to replace this thing. The main reason being, if you have the new controller, the old brain, the Calyx Vista, and the V2 goggles, which is what we have back there, you will not be able to connect these three, and that is very annoying. So if you have a new DJI 03 unit and you have an old FPV Calyx Vista, you just can't fly unless you have another remote, which is the most compelling reason why you need an alternative. Another reason, which we've covered extensively, is that these gimbals are fairly small, so you don't get the same amount of motion or movement that you do get in the past, which I did cover in the previous video, so make sure you check that out. And the third reason is that I've been openly roasted for recommending this remote, even though I stand by everything I say. People say you should use a Crossfire or Express ELRS option because you can have a more reliable link between the controller and your drone, and also you can get a controller that looks completely different to this, more professional, more options, better firmware, you name it. So that brings us to what is the best alternative, and I've personally found in my experience it is the Jumper T Pro. This might shock you. First of all, they look extremely similar, which is almost comical. And people have absolutely bashed this controller. They've questioned the form factor, the usability, but I can confidently say in 2023, this has been completely resolved and no one has said anything about it. And if you're new to the hobby and you want an alternative, then you'd probably never even think about this because all the reviews are negative, which is pretty sad. The main gripe that reviewers had with this controller in the past is, one, there is a potential to actually brick this controller if you don't flash this properly, which is extremely hard to do in my opinion. Just make sure this thing is charged and everything will go smoothly, and there are also ways to prevent that so it's not actually bricked, but for me that absolutely never happened. And two, people have roasted it in the past for not having a switch to actually arm and disarm the quad, because back in the day this button, which has an off and on state, did not exist. So you had these switches up here which were completely momentary. So why would you want to arm your quad? You press the button, it arms, and then it just disarms because it's a momentary switch. But long story short, they've implemented this new proper arming button, which basically resolves all that, and I really don't see any problem with this controller at all. I briefly mentioned it just then, but this is an Express LRS controller. Basically what that means is if you want to connect to any of your drones, you're going to have to solder a receiver onto the flight controller, and that's the only way you can pair the drone to this. But that is the only drawback, and we'll talk about that experience very shortly. If you don't know what Express LRS is, it's just a protocol which how this talks to a receiver, and it gives you great range. The reason we don't pick Crossfire, which is basically like a controller language to your drone, is because that's much more expensive. This is open source, and long story short, the receivers for this is a lot cheaper. So as a quick example, if you had 4 drones that have Express LRS receivers, they'll only be $80, but if you have 4 drones running Crossfire, that could be $160, so double the price. So really quickly, you might be wondering, wait a minute, the Jumper T Pro, there's so many other gamepad style controllers out there, why are we going for the Jumper T Pro? So really, in the landscape of Game Boy style controllers that use Express LRS, every controller has caveats except the Jumper T Pro. First of all, the most, I guess, superior controller, which everyone highly regards, is the Radio Master Zorro. And I don't have one here, but the biggest issue is the battery life is not great. They use smaller batteries, which is a very questionable decision. And when you fly FPV, there's already 100 things that can go wrong. Adding another one to the mix, for example, not having battery life in your controller, is something I do not want. And it's just a huge pain to have a battery pack. You want to fly multiple packs in a day, maybe even 2 days. You're just going to have to bring a charger if you have a Zorro, which is just not great. Another option is the iFlight Commander 8, and I think that is a pretty solid option, but is more expensive, and the gimbals are smaller on that controller. And if they're smaller, you might as well just use this, right? It also does not have adjustable sticks, which these sticks are adjustable, so they can just fit any preference of flying style, and that is a very underrated addition. If you're flying the iFlight controller, you're gonna have to buy new sticks. They cost $20. If those aren't right, pay another $20, get some more sticks, and the prices just accumulate. Those are the main 2 competitors, and there's just so many caveats with these other controllers, except for the Jumper T Pro, which I have not found any. This thing does absolutely amazing. Disregard all those negative reviews. In 2023, they've got the proper arming button. It's really all fixed. There's nothing you could ask more. It has the right battery size. It really just works great. All right, so now hopefully I've sold you on this alternative. Let's talk about the price breakdown of the new FPV controller for DJI and also the Jumper T Pro. So talking in Australian prices, this controller is about $180 and this is about $230. That's already a $50 discount. However, you're going to have to buy a few things. First of all, you need to buy the batteries for this controller. controller. That costs like 10 bucks. And you also need to buy receivers, which costs about $20 for Express LRS. So really quickly, if you buy 2 receivers, the batteries and this controller, it basically costs the exact same price as the DJI FPV controller too. So just with that, I guess it's fairly justifiable that you might as well buy this if you're going to buy the DJI controller, because there's not much of a price disparity and you can fly all your old drones and your new drones, which is great. Because people have flown this extremely far, it really does not fail safe at all. And your goggles will definitely disconnect way before the controller does, which gives you an opportunity, for example, if you lose connection, just punch up, try and regain signal, and it could easily save your day. So from a price standpoint, this new edition is definitely worth it. The other extremely important consideration to make the switch or not is the time and convenience of both options. Obviously, you buy this controller, you just press a few buttons and everything's bound, no worries, no stress. Beginners probably love that, but dive into the world of Express LRS. Is it hard? I've never used it before. How was my experience? Is it worth it? And I can safely say I think it is worth it. In terms of downloading the software, learning how to kind of like flash the receiver, connect everything together, it really is not that hard, because Joshua Bardwell, our FPV father, gives you multiple options, and sometimes I'm just thinking, wait, which option do I do? This is so confusing. Has this actually worked properly? I don't know, but it really wasn't that hard and we got it done. The most difficult thing I encountered was that I did not read the soldering diagram properly and I soldered the wrong endpoint to the wrong endpoint. I just scratched my head for like 4 hours. Why is this not working? And after I was able to read again, everything worked completely fine. So I probably wasted about like 4 hours trying to work out how this thing works, but it really is not that hard. There is the second consideration of time, which is soldering the receiver to the flight controller. It's somewhere in there, and that obviously takes anywhere from 10, 20, even an hour. Probably took me about like 30 minutes. I'm not the best, I don't do it that often, but you have to disassemble this whole thing. But really, it's not that much of a time commitment. It's not daunting at all. It's very self-explanatory, and if you follow videos, you can't really go wrong. The last important factor of should you switch is have these big gimbals. They're definitely a lot bigger, as you can see with this comparison. Do these bigger gimbals, which gives you kind of like more range of motion to control your drone. Doesn't make me a better pilot. And honestly, once you have these longer sticks that replace the old smaller DJI FPV controller sticks, I don't really find myself having a big difference. Like, it's not like I use this controller, I'm like, wow, I'm so good now, I can hit every gap. I really don't think that's the case. But that being said, using this controller has now become extremely intuitive. It basically feels like I'm using the big black box, the old controller, but just a smaller, better form factor version that doesn't break my back in my bag. So that's one thing to keep in mind. I think at the end of the day, just having a more secure control link is kind of worthwhile. I've used this controller in countless risky situations, the old controller as well, and I've never had really any issues. But that being said, accidents only happen once. One little hiccup, you're gonna lose your drone, so I guess it's better to be safe than sorry, although I don't really think that should be the deciding factor. I think more importantly, if you fly the V2 goggles, which are these, then you should definitely hop on Express LRS, because sadly, this new controller, the old goggles and the Caddx Vistas will not connect. And if you have any drones that have the Caddx Vista, you have the V2 goggles, there's just no hope for you in terms of this controller. So you need to have an alternative, which is why you should definitely buy this. I think it's also worth noting that the V2 goggles actually are supposedly better than the actual brand new goggles in terms of range and penetration with the O3 units. It also gives you a better frame rate and it fits a lot of people's faces better. So I think the majority of FPV flies still use the old goggles. So in that case, the Jumper T Pro with Express LRS should definitely be the option. And it's just a cherry on top having that very solid control link on this controller and your drone. Alright, so that just about does it. If you're interested in the controller, there's a link in the description. Use it, it doesn't cost you any more, it helps me out, so I'd appreciate that. And if you do want an actual full breakdown of this and other Express LRS options, the whole type of what I learned in Express LRS, is it worth it? Dive into receivers a bit more, just talk about the whole process a bit more, let me know. But otherwise, I hope you got something from the video and I'll catch you in the next one.